I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll discuss a commitment finally aboard here. USIS wide receiver Tyree Patterson, three-star receiver from Central Florida there, gives his commitment to the Gators. Carlos Rio-Wilson hits the transfer portal, the quarterback room. We expected some transition, starting to see it. Spring game confirms Anthony Richardson is the Gators starting quarterback. An article by Will Miles on Read and Reaction this past week. And we'll wrap up discussing the whirlwind around the Richardson speeding ticket story that went on this weekend over the World Wide Web. Will, how's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going pretty well. We've been busy behind the scenes. Obviously, got some stuff going up on the YouTube side as well. Had that interview with Kevin Kelly. Did a wrap up after the spring game, and then we've got an announcement we're going to be putting up next week. So if you're interested in getting the information early, you can go over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/read and reaction. We'll be announcing it early over there, giving away some freebies, and then next week on Stand Up and Holler, we'll be announcing what's going on, letting everybody know, and hopefully everybody likes what we got in the works.
Yeah, until then, Will. Until then, let's move on to two bits. Tyree Patterson, a 6'2", 175-pound receiver from USIS, Florida, commits to the program. This is the first official commit of the Billy Napier era for the class of 2023. Will, let me put a caveat on that. You had one that was in the system already, but previously committed to the prior staff stayed aboard here. Caught 53 passes for a little over 1,000 yards last year, close to 1,100 yards, 13 touchdowns. He was a basketball player, lanky guy, but he's also a strong dude. Played basketball, and new coach comes into Eustis. Sophomore year, plays some football, has a productive year. In junior year, really went off with the 53 catches for over 1,000 yards. Will, this is a guy a little bit under the radar. Florida was one of the first Power 5 programs to offer him a scholarship. Wide receiver coach Kerry Colbert likes what he sees in Patterson, compared him to Drake London. For those of you who don't follow USC football or the NFL draft, this guy was a stud under Colbert at USC, is probably going to be a first-round draft pick here in the next couple of weeks. So, again, I know there was a lot of chatter about him being a three-star. Some of the recruiting services are catching up a little bit here. However, you do have to fill the class out, Will. And you're not going to get a class full of 5-star kids. You look at his film, looks explosive, looks the part, looks like a guy that could come in. I mean, he's a big guy, could break some tackles, looks like a guy that could come in and be productive. He also said, Patterson said, Florida just felt like home. He really enjoyed his relationship with the coaches during the process.
Yeah, there's a few things here for the rankings specifically. I mean, like you said, he was in the thousands, has gone up to 570th recently. Some of that is because of the commitment. Some of that's because people probably looked at film after the commitment. At the same time, there's not a big difference between people ranked in the 500 to 600 range and guys ranked in the 300 to 400 range. So like whether he ends up a low 4-star, whether he stays a high 3-star, I don't think really matters. And you need guys like this for depth, and you need guys like this to pan out every once in a while, right? I mean, Kadarius Toney was ranked in this general area when he came to Florida from Alabama, a few years ago. And obviously Toney turns into a big time player. The issue is that you can't build an entire class around guys like these because they don't pan out at a rate high enough to have you be successful in a conference like the SEC. So you don't judge a class based on one guy like this. And certainly I'm not going to denigrate the guy. He's a good football player. The question is going to be, is he going to be good enough based on the other people that Billy Napier brings in? Or do you get lightning in a bottle? One of the thing I try to kind of compare recruiting to is the Golden State Warriors. That's the best comparison I can think of, right? The Golden State Warriors got Steph Curry. He was a top 10 pick. They got Klay Thompson. He was top 10, top 20 pick. They got Draymond Green in the second round, and Draymond Green makes that entire thing go, not necessarily just because he's really, really good. It's because they got someone of high value late in the draft and didn't have to get a top 10 pick to get him. To me, that's like the 3-star guy who pans out. He's the Draymond Green who gives you enormous extra value for having gotten him in that place. But is not going to make or break your team, right? You take Steph Curry away, You take Klay Thompson away, and the Warriors are pretty bad, right? Even if Draymond Green's playing. In fact, we saw that a couple of years ago when they were terrible, when Curry got hurt and Thompson was out, and all of a sudden it was Draymond out there scoring 10 points by himself, and the Warriors weren't winning a whole bunch of games. So that's kind of where I would do the comparison when it comes to things like this. Again, I think Patterson might jump up to a low 4-star. I don't think that changes the analysis. The issue is that here's what we know. We know that he's going to have a very little overall impact on the actual recruiting rating at the end of the year. He's going to move it 2 points one direction or the other. We also know he isn't a can't miss prospect, because if he was a can't miss prospect, he would be up in that, 15, 30, 45, somewhere in that top 50 players. And he's not there, right? Usually those guys who are ranked up that high have obvious physical skills and have significant things on tape. I don't think Patterson has that yet. He's not somebody who jumps out at you when you look at the film like a 5-star guy does, but still a very, very good player. So I think, what it really boils down to is it's a solid but unspectacular signing. I understand why people are getting a little bit antsy about things, but I also wrote a couple of weeks ago about sort of the timing of commitments, and especially with NIL, we've talked about how that might actually delay some of these commitments a little bit as well. That's yet to be seen, but there's a lot of guys who are committing in May and June coming up who are on Florida's radar. So you get past June and there's still only 2 guys, and one of them is Patterson and the other one is Gates. Then, okay, well, now we got to start having some discussions. But until some of these big guys, big 5-star guys who said they're going to commit over the summer, start landing elsewhere, I don't think it's time to worry.
Romani McClain, AJ Harris, if one of those guys was in the bag already and Patterson committed, I don't think you'd hear any type of panic whatsoever. I don't think you'd hear that. I guess the problem a lot of Florida fans have is say, well, we talked about a lot of 3-star guys like this during the Dan Mullen era, but Texas A&M, how many 5-star kids did A&M just sign? Well, just for perspective here. 7. And that's all-time type stuff. Alabama did the same a year or two ago. Like, that's unbelievable amount, and you're signing 25 kids in some of these classes, 20, 25 kids. So 7 is a huge number. So we're just talking about signing. Will's magic number here for 5-star kids is 3, right? We've heard Will say it week in and week out on this program. So this is good. This guy looks like a good player. Like, he looks like a solid player. You flip on the film. Demetrius Harvey, all Gators. He has a great breakdown. If you go check out his piece on this kid, on Patterson, got a great scouting report, a lot of good highlights on there. I watched those highlight clips and you go through it. Demetrius did a great job scouting him too. And man, I'll tell you what, he definitely looks like a guy that could be a contributor at some point on this team. And that's what you need. And there's more talk. You talked, he did vault up. If we want to be literal about that, I think we get so caught up on the 5-star and the high end type guys sometimes, Will, that it can come across as devaluing some of these lower tier ranked guys. But it's like you said, not all these guys get to go to all the camps. He was actually Harvey mentioned in his article too, that Sports Illustrated pointed out that Patterson was a standout guy at the ESPN 300 camp up in Orlando too. He was one of 12 guys that was called out by Sports Illustrated at that camp. So this is a guy that was maybe a little bit under the radar, played a lot of basketball, but is starting to catch people's attention. And Florida was on him early, local kid. Hey, we talked about wanting to get better about recruiting the area, putting a big circle around the radius around Gainesville and get better. Eustis, Florida, that fits the bill, Will. That means you're paying attention to your backyard right there. You should be ahead of the curve. So I don't think that's a bad thing Florida was first. I think that's good that Florida's ahead of the curve on that one.
Look, I mean, so for frame of reference, Georgia signed 9 3-star recruits last year, and Georgia had the number 3 ranked recruiting class in the country, which means they signed 20 guys who weren't 5-star and 4-stars. And so that to me is what you need to expect, right? Now, the order of addition, especially this early on, I don't think really matters. But so the other thing is there's a major difference between a guy who's ranked 2,400th and is a 3-star and a guy who's ranked 500th and is a 3-star. Those guys who are ranked 500th and 600th get drafted in the NFL at the exact same rate as guys ranked 300 to 400th, and they get drafted with very similar, it's a slightly higher, I think, even draft position when you look at, depending upon which set of data you look at. But basically it's equivalent, right? So what that tells you is the outcome of a guy ranked 500th is extraordinarily similar to the outcome of a guy ranked 300th, whereas the outcome of a guy ranked 2000th is very different than the outcome of a guy ranked 300th. So that's kind of what you're looking for. And if you look at Georgia's class last year, 9 guys, but all those 3 stars were ranked in the top 1000. So I think that's kind of what you want to look for in terms of when you talk about filling out the class. You want to fill out a class with 3 stars who are in that, 400 to 700 range. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to use up all sorts of roster spots on 3-star guys in areas where maybe, in areas where maybe you've got strength in numbers, and Florida certainly doesn't have that at wide receiver, right? Florida needs to build up the numbers at wide receiver. So even if they reach a little bit at wide receiver, so long as there's a couple of elite prospects who are slightly different than Patterson coming in, because think about it. I mean, one of the things we were looking at for the spring game, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit. One of the things I was looking for specifically was separation at the wide receiver position, and we weren't seeing a lot of it. And so certainly didn't see a lot of it last year either. And so, look, I mean, they need help at that position. If this guy can return kicks and reliably return kicks, he's worth the scholarship regardless. So look, I mean, congratulations, guy's a Gator. That's great. I want everybody to support him. I don't want anybody being denigrating over one player. I don't think you should evaluate a class over one player. And I don't think Patterson is reflective of this being a good class or a bad class. I think what'll be reflective is when you look up overall and look at the average player ranking, we'll be able to make a determination. We're not there yet. But we'll be there soon, because coming up May, June, July, there's a bunch of guys who are going to be committing, and a bunch of them need to commit to Florida for this class to be successful.
You have to have freaky athleticism if you're going to be picking up a scholarship offer from Florida with just basically 2 years of football under your belt. That really says something. So kudos to Patterson on the commitment, and congratulations again, like Will said. Another thing too, Will, if you're talking about a developmental project in the era of the transfer portal, do you want to go get a kid from 8 hours away to develop, or do you want to get a kid about an hour down the road in Eustis? I think that's a good pickup. That's smart. I think that's a smart job recruiting on the trail there by Colbert and Napier and the staff. And hey, I like the pickup. I think it looks pretty good.
And look, I mean, I'm not shooting off fireworks or anything, but I'm glad the kid's a Gator. I think it's a positive thing. And like you said, I think in the world of an NIL, you need guys who are going to contribute their junior year and are willing to sit behind elite prospects for a couple of years. And you got to build up that depth for the program. You also need to save money so that on the NIL deals, you've got it for the elite prospects you need. I actually do think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens with NIL, because one of the things I can envision seeing is that middle tier of guys who right now get a lot of attention in the 250 to 450 range, if they're asking for significant amounts of money, I think there's a possibility that some of these elite programs are going to say, you know what, we're going to go further down and trust our evaluations a little bit more, rather than running after the recruiting rankings for these guys who are good players and might even be better players, but are they going to be worth the money? And people are going to have to figure out how to allocate their resources appropriately when it comes to NIL deals. Not that you're allowed to actually tie the NIL to a commitment, but there might be some resource allocation that goes on there.
We don't go off with some rogue opinions from some guy named Slice Bread on Bro Bible. We don't do that. I think the NIL thing too, you have to consider is if colleges get smart. We're still in the Wild West times with this thing. If the colleges get smart, the NFL figured it out, where with rookie deals, they put limits on rookie deals. Finally, they stopped signing as rookies to these franchise breaking contracts. Maybe you'll see more priority given to guys who stick around the program and actually develop within the program at some point. That might be a transition you see at some point. Let's move on to 4 bits. Carlos Del Rio-Wilson has announced his intent to transfer product out of Cartersville, Georgia. Wilson, he was projected as a Power 5 starter by 24/7 coming out of high school. 4-star prospect, had 12 scholarship offers, including Florida. That's all from 24/7 Sports. Gators are now left with 4 scholarship quarterbacks: Richardson, Miller, redshirt freshman Jalen Kitna, and freshman Max Brown, who's coming in this summer. Billy Napier recruit from the class of 2022. Will, this was expected. Maybe not necessarily Rio-Wilson. We didn't necessarily circle his name, but there's going to be more turnover. There's going to be more names. We saw Lamar, I believe Lamar Good put his name in too. We're going to see a little bit of an exodus here after spring practice. So not shocking to see. I like Rio-Wilson's potential. I think he looks good, but he's going to probably at least blow this year behind Miller and Richardson. And, that would leave him fighting for a job next year, assuming Richardson, has a great year and is able to take off. Richardson might be coming back next year. Who knows? So very uncertain future ahead here at Florida. Not the coaching staff he committed to. He was a strong candidate if you would have looked at the roster beforehand and said guys who might transfer early on. Rio-Wilson was a strong candidate for that, and here we are.
Well, I mean, especially after the spring game, right? I mean, Rio-Wilson comes in, has a couple of drives, and then when they got down to the 4 minutes, they bring AR back in the fourth quarter of the spring game. And, he comes in to finish the game. And I was like, well, maybe they're bringing him in to do the 4-minute drill or something like that. They basically just let him run out the clock. And whether that's because something happened on the sideline or whether it's just because the staff realized that they wanted to get Richardson back in there because Rio-Wilson wasn't in their long-term plans. I think everybody knew what was going on at that point beforehand, right? The fact that we didn't see those guys in there, I think is probably reflective of what's going to happen. We knew this was going to happen the minute they brought in Max Brown and Jack Miller, right? I mean, Miller's got quite a few years of eligibility left. So he's going to be sort of the heir apparent to Anthony Richardson, and he's the handpicked guy from Napier coming in. So maybe Napier signs a stud who comes in as a true freshman and beats out Miller. But the reality is Miller is the guy that his staff had evaluated, his staff had targeted and said, hey, we're going to bring him in as a transfer right away. And then they signed Max Brown. And the minute they signed Max Brown, that said something about the confidence that they had in the redshirt freshman that they had in the room, because you don't go out and sign Brown unless you think, one, he's truly special, or two, you realize that, you sort of want to set up timing to where, Miller can take over for Richardson and then Brown can take over for Miller, or really Brown is sort of filler until you get to where you've got an elite quarterback prospect in the fold, but really, yeah, I mean, you mentioned we're going to start to see some there's going to be a mass exodus. I mean, Napier was talking about 5. I think we talked about this last week. Napier has talked about giving scholarships to 5 walk-ons. He's talking about raiding the transfer portal after the spring. He don't have any scholarships left. In fact, he's already over the limit, which means anybody they bring in through the transfer portal, there's going to have to be a subsequent defection. Anybody that they give a scholarship to who's a walk-on, there's going to have to be a subsequent defection. So, if you talk bring in, let's say 7 guys from the portal, 5 scholarships to guys who are walk-ons, that means you got to free up 12 scholarships plus the 3 or 4 they're already over the limit. So, there's going to be 15, 16 guys who are on the roster for the spring who are not going to be on the roster in the fall. And that is going to significantly impact the team's depth overall. But you hope that it's good for the long-term health of the program, the culture that Napier wants to build, and quite honestly, the playing time for the guys who are going elsewhere. Rio-Wilson wasn't going to get to play. And so, I don't blame him for wanting to go someplace else. I wish him well. I hope he doesn't go to Auburn because that's where quarterbacks go to die. And, beyond that, if he comes back to Gainesville, I'll be rooting against him. Other than that, I'll be rooting for him. Heard nothing but good things about him in terms of, just sort of his ability and where he's going to go. Just wasn't the right fit. And that's going to happen every time you get a coaching change.
Yeah. If you look at the skill set, he definitely looks like a big quarterback, can move, got good movement and everything. We haven't seen much of him on the field. So we can't give much of analysis at a college level here, but he definitely looks the part. I think there's a lot of programs where that guy can walk in the door and be a starter. Maybe not this year. Maybe it's a little late this year, but definitely by fall 2023, I think he'd be a serious contender to start at a lot of programs in America.
Sure. I mean, I think that's obviously a possibility, but I think you wish him well and hope he does well, just like we did with guys like Jeff Driscoll and Jacoby Brissett. The difference is those guys left and Florida didn't have anybody at quarterback. I think with Rio-Wilson leaving, the only way Florida ends up in a bind in that case is if we have like a nightmare season like 2013, where Tyler Murphy goes down and Driscoll goes down, and all of a sudden you got Skylar Mortonweg back there, and maybe Max Brown is playing quarterback in week 9, and if so, then we'll be sitting there going, geez, would have been really helpful to have Carlos Rio-Wilson at the same time. look, I mean, getting those guys snaps, getting those guys reps. You never have 5 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster for 2 reasons. One, it's an inefficient use of scholarships, but the other reason is none of those guys get snaps. They don't get any better. And so, look, I think that's the reality, is that Mullen brought in 2 quarterbacks in that last cycle. Those guys were going to be fighting for playing time, and whichever one was getting less playing time was going to go someplace else, because at this point they're sort of stacked up. I mean, Miller is going to encompass the entire time that Rio-Wilson and Kitna were going to be on campus pretty much. And if that's the case, then you're fighting with a handpicked you're fighting with a hand-picked transfer with no real chance of winning. And if Rio-Wilson fell behind Kitna, then it makes complete sense that he would leave, right? Because then he's got 2 guys in front of him plus AR. And if that's the case, then, hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't know if that was representative of playing time, but we did see Kitna before Rio-Wilson, didn't we, in the spring game?
Yeah, we saw Miller before AR, but that's because there was a turnover
again,
on the opening kickoff.
Yeah, not sure it's representative of playing time, so I don't want to read too much into it. Let's move on to 6 bits here. And speaking of reading a lot into the spring game, Will Miles' article, spring game confirms Anthony Richardson is the Gators starting quarterback. The spring game, not usually a good tool for heavy analysis overall, but in this case, it confirmed Anthony Richardson's status as the clear-cut starter, barring some injury or other outside force happening here. Anthony Richardson will very likely be the Gators starting quarterback in 2022. Will, we all saw the game. Richardson was outstanding, played very well, looked very smooth and efficient. But what specifically gave you confidence about Richardson's performance?
I mean, so it was a couple of things. One is that when the right play was to scramble, he was scrambling even during the spring game. The other thing is that there were multiple times that they ran the same concepts. One, for Miller, and then for Richardson, there are actually 3 specific plays that I highlighted in the article. One's a deep throw where Miller sort of stares down his receiver and the safety ends up finding his way over there because of it. Richardson has the exact same play. He looks off the safety, and so it's a one-on-one throw down the field. Another throw across the middle, which is one of the throws that Richardson struggled with last year, and he puts it right on the guy's numbers. There's not a lot of space to put it in there, but it is one-on-one coverage, and he lets it go with confidence. And Miller sort of delays, doesn't throw it, even though the guy's coming open over the middle, scrambles out, it completes it to DeMarcus Bowman, ends up getting like 3-4 yards instead of 15. And then the third play was one of the just sort of little dump off passes to the tight end, where they have the tight end coming across the formation, that Miller was just late getting the ball out, and it almost got Keon Zipper killed. And then with Noah Keeter coming across, Richardson got it to him right away, and it turned into a big explosive play. And the story really, to me, was when Jack Miller was quarterback, the team was able to move the ball, but it didn't feel lively. It didn't feel crisp. It didn't feel like they were driving to the end zone. It felt like they sort of had just enough to get into the red zone, and then that was it. And then everything sort of, just when things get smaller, when the field gets smaller, you got to make decisions. You got to make them quickly, and you got to make them decisively. And that was the thing I think you saw with AR in the spring game, is his decision making was quick. It was rapid. And look, he's going to throw some interceptions. He's going to make some mistakes, but he's not going to make the mistakes because he's afraid of making the mistakes. He's going to make the mistakes because he's being aggressive, because he's making quick decisions. The speed with which he makes decisions is faster than Emory Jones last year, and it was definitely faster than Jack Miller during the spring game. Now, the caveat to that is Anthony Richardson has had the ability to practice with these guys for the last couple of years, and Jack Miller's brand new. And so maybe that's an unfair analysis of Miller. But considering they both had essentially the same amount of time in Napier's system, it was pretty clear that Richardson was either more comfortable with it, or he's just more adept at sort of processing the information quickly and making the right reads. And to be honest, his performance in the spring game looked a lot like his performance against LSU. And LSU played a lot of kind of vanilla. We know he's going to run. We don't know whether he can pass. We're going to sort of dare him to, and he carved them up. The Georgia game, Georgia played a considerably more complex scheme. Obviously, he struggled. And so that's going to be the question as we move into the season, is once the defense can do something a little bit more exotic, is Richardson able to make the adjustment? Is he able to still make those quick decisions? I think he's going to be able to. I think, I've been saying for a while, I think he's not only has the ability to be special, but I think he profiles as someone who's going to be special based on his high school stats and the way he improved, based on his ability to run the ball, and based on how quickly he's making those decisions. So that'd be the big thing. thing. It's just the decisiveness, right? You make the decision, you live with the mistakes. You're okay living with the mistakes. You're not playing to lose, you're playing to win. And the difference in the plays between, other than the really bad interception for Miller, the difference between the two quarterbacks was Richardson would get a 14-yard gain when Miller would get a 5 because Miller hesitated, or Richardson would convert a first down where Miller would drop it off and you just get a punt because he hesitated. And so last year, it was really hard for me to quantify why the offense felt different when Anthony Richardson was in there versus Emory Jones, other than the explosive plays. But even that Florida State game, the explosive plays went away and Richardson's stats weren't that great, but the offense felt different. And I think the reason it felt different, the reason it feels different now, is because his decision-making is fast. And so everything feels crisp. And that was what we saw in the spring game, sort of a reinforcement that even with this new offense, Richardson's going to be able to pick it up and run with it, because he's that sort of player.
It's easy to get excited. We have an entire year to build ourselves up in excitement for Gator football in September. I could probably sit around the table and sell 7-0 start. I could probably sell it, right? Like if we get by Kentucky and Utah, got that road trip to Tennessee, LSU comes down, like you could probably walk your way through it and it wouldn't be overly delusional to sell it. But we all know Richardson's got that high-end gear. We've seen it. We've seen the flash with this guy. Even though it was against USF, some of those plays were incredible. That run against FAU. I mean, we've seen that second half with LSU. He nearly single-handedly brought that team back. It was a dead offense in the first half. Sparked it, scores 42. We ended up scoring 42 points in that game after a weak first half. So the high-end potential is there. I think we all see it. We all can get excited about it. Where do you think by the end of 2021 this actually shakes out? Is it somewhere in between? Does he come close to that high-end potential? If he stays healthy, Will, because that's the number one question. If the man can stay healthy and stay on the field, where do you think we view Anthony Richardson by the end of 2022?
I think if he stays healthy, Florida averages 38 points per game. And they have a top 15 offense in the country.
So you're lightly optimistic.
Well, I mean, so I've said this
again. That's pretty.
I think I said this last week. I think it can be really close to what the 2020 offense was. Yeah. I think it can be close. I don't think he's got the receivers. I think there will be times that a really good team like Georgia, if they've got the athletes on defense, can lock them down. I think it'll be more inconsistent, but it'll be inconsistently great. And then inconsistently sort of pedestrian at different times. But look, they averaged 28 points per game against FBS opponents last year. They averaged 31 points per game if you factor in the Citadel game. Anthony Richardson is going to get to play in that FBS game when you start thinking about that. And so if you eliminated, say, the Kentucky game and the Missouri game last year and replaced those with good performances, Florida's in the 34, 35, 36 point per game range. I think that's doable. I don't think that there's going to be just like the giant duds that go out there unless the duds are related to turnovers or, and this is the other thing, is that the defense, one of the reasons the team in 2020 averaged 40 points a game is because they kept getting the ball back because the defense gave it right back to them, tied 7-7, tied 14-14, tied 21-21. And that may happen this year as well, given, with all the excitement around Richardson. It was a little bit sad to hear Billy Napier just begging for the Orange defense to get a stop at some point there because they were getting torched pretty good. But yeah, I mean, look, I think Anthony Richardson is a special player. Like one of the things is I think we've all sort of danced around saying he has the potential to be all that sort of stuff. I think that's kind of out the window. We got enough film at this point that he is going to be a special player. The question is, can he stay healthy? And the question to me for this team is, what can the defense do? I'm very bullish on the offense. I'm very bearish on the defense. I think this is going to be 2020-ish in terms of the way it feels, or maybe like 2007-ish. Probably not a Heisman Trophy for Anthony Richardson, but that kind of thing, right? That Michigan game in 2007 where Florida couldn't stop them, but Michigan couldn't stop Florida either. Like, I think that's going to be a lot of what we see in 2022, and it'll be fun. I don't know if it'll be productive, but I think it'll be fun. Yeah. So I'm very, very high on Anthony Richardson, in case you can't tell. And I don't know why I wouldn't be. Every time I'm out there, like, you got guys looking off safeties. You've got him making quick decisions. You got that throw he made to Whittemore across the middle was really good. Is a defense going to be able to trick him, and will that turn into an interception at some point? Sure. But I don't think he's going to throw 13 or 14 interceptions. I think he'll throw 10. But I think he'll probably throw 30 touchdowns. And, you add 6, 7, 8 touchdowns running the ball. I think the offense is going to move.
Absolutely. I love that optimism. I see the same potential with Richardson. Just a lot of questions around him. And I think he's going to have a lot of help there in the running game too. So I think Richardson makes that running game stronger too. Just like we talked, that was the talk last year going into the season with Jones. We were certain the running game was going to improve. I do believe the running game will be strong this year, even though we got a lot of questions at the receiver spot. But Richardson definitely is a special cat, man. I definitely think it could be a good season.
Like, go back and watch the Florida State game, not the LSU game, because the LSU game was otherworldly. Mm-hmm. But the Florida State game, he was hurt. His knee was bugging him.
Right.
His stats.
He went for surgery right after that on the knee.
His stats are bad. Like, when you look at the actual Florida State game, his stats are not that good. But then tell me, how did the offense feel when Anthony Richardson was in there versus how did the offense feel when Emory Jones was in there? That's the question. And I felt it again when we were watching the spring game. When Jack Miller was in there, it felt like Emory Jones was the quarterback. It was that feeling where it's like, we have the ability to move the ball. I don't know that we have the ability to. There is no top gear, right? I got the accelerator pedal all the way down. The offense is moving, and as the field shrinks, all of a sudden the capabilities of my car can't manage the curves that I've got in this tight window. Whereas with Richardson, it just feels different. And I think that the Florida State game, more than anything, is the thing that I'm looking back on and saying, that's the thing he validated in the spring game, is that there is just a crispness and a speed with which the decisions are made that makes me say, with all the physical tools he has, this is going to be a fun season.
And for anyone who doesn't remember, Jones played into the third quarter of that FSU game, threw 3 interceptions, I believe, before they finally put Richardson in that game. So Richardson was injured, and he proceeded to lead the Gators on, I think, 3 of 4 drives they scored on, I believe. So
some of that was Dameon Pierce. They finally just decided to give Pierce the ball.
Yeah, a lot of it was Dameon Pierce, but yeah, I don't know. It's like you said, it feels a little different. Well, we're gonna stay on topic with our quarterback here. So before we head to the dollar, let's just make it very clear. It's our quarterback going into the season. We're fired up about the guy, but we're gonna talk about the backlash on the report that came out with Anthony Richardson this weekend from Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times. He reported that Florida Gators star Anthony Richardson was stopped for driving 105 miles per hour. UF's presumptive starter has an arraignment scheduled for May 25th after last week's 4 a.m. traffic stop. He was stopped, pulled over at 4:11 a.m. on Monday, April 4th on Newberry Road, about 13 miles west of Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. And he has a name, image, and likeness deal with Gainesville Dodge, who's probably the real winner in this situation, Will, driving a 2021 Dodge at the time. Basically, since he's going over 30 miles over the speed limit, that's the reason he has an arraignment for May 25th. Gators Online, Nick Delatorre, though, did an interview with him after this story came out. Richardson said, "I know I'm not perfect, but it was a mistake. I was speeding. My mom always tells me to drive safe because I can not only hurt myself, but I can hurt other people. I shouldn't have done it. And I definitely could say I've learned my lesson." Richardson said he and his family immediately reached out to the coaching staff after it happened, and he addressed the team Friday night. He said, "I talked to my team and I let them know I'm going to handle my business. I'm going to do everything right from this point forward. Doing something like that makes the team and the organization look bad, and I don't want to do that." That's a good end of the story right there, Will. So in terms of the actual, let's talk about the event itself. You're out here on Twitter confessing all your crimes, all your speeding crimes, Will, and you have a whole chain of people confessing theirs. Maybe it's the Sicilian in me. I'm not into the whole crime confession thing, but it's a speeding ticket, Will. Like, we're not going to overdo it here. We're not going to overdo it. Like, the guy got a speeding ticket. I get it. 105 is pretty freaking fast too. We can all agree on that. But so in terms of the actual event, Kid's got a fast car. He's driving fast. Like, if he's a kid, he's in college, made a mistake. He says, sounds like he made it. I don't think this defines him in any way, shape, or form. It was a stupid mistake. Sounds like he's learned his lesson. Good for him. But for those, that's the actual event itself. And do you want to address that before we go to the story part of it?
I mean, other than the fact that, like you said, I was confessing, there's definitely a record of me being pulled over on I-75 right around Lake City. I was driving back from Texas, got caught up in traffic out in Lake Charles, Louisiana, just sitting there on my hood for like 4 or 5 hours. It's 4 a.m. I'm coming back. I got my pedal all the way down. Cop pulls me over. I'm like, oh crap, writes me up for going like 94. I'm like, well, I'm glad you didn't see me 10 miles ago. So, I mean, look, I was 21 years old. Should I have been going that fast? No.
Right.
Did I make a mistake? Yes. Does it make me a bad person? No. Doesn't end up in the newspaper because nobody gave a crap about me when I was 21 years old in college.
Yes.
But, there is a little bit more of a spotlight on the quarterback, and he knows that, but there's no drugs. There's no alcohol. There's no guns. There's no crime being committed other than the speeding. He's out in anybody who's ever been out in that area in Newberry Road. The biggest danger is he was going to just obliterate a deer.
Yeah.
Not do anything else.
Yeah.
Right. So look, I mean, it wasn't the smartest thing to do. No. When I was 19 years old, did I do stuff like that? Yes. So I'm really not in any place to judge the kid. And that to me is, well, we'll get to it because I'm pretty sure you're about to talk about the media and then the backlash to that as well.
So it's dark country roads over there. So it's by the way, 4 a.m. if he's living in that area, he's from Gainesville too, right? So he knows the town pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sure there's maybe parts of the town when we all live in an area for a while, we probably know areas where we could probably cruise a little more than others. And maybe he's done it 100 times.
So put it this way. I used to have to drive I drove to high school and I went to a magnet school. It was a little bit of ways from where I was when I lived down in Fort Myers. And McGregor Boulevard in Fort Myers has palm trees planted at equal distances the whole way down the road. And what you learn if you're a boy and you like going fast is that you can actually get it to be a solid wall of palm trees if you go fast enough. Now, the speed limit's 35, and you do not see that solid wall of pine trees until you hit at least 80. So look, I mean, I can't say anything. I think the interesting thing about the Twitter thread that I had going on is there are plenty of people who are sitting there going, yep, guilty. Yep, guilty. Yep, guilty. It turns out 18, 19, 20-year-old boys are stupid. And that's something that I think we forget as we get older is that we were all stupid. There may be a record of me chucking water balloons off of 80 towers at people as well. Like, look, I'm an idiot now.
Do you got anything else you want to confess while we're at it?
No, I'll leave it at that for now. I don't want to get in trouble if my wife listens to this.
Just getting nervous over here. I'm not liking all this confessing shit.
I haven't killed anybody.
Well,
you're Italian.
We don't talk about that. But anyway, so listen. Again, the story itself. So just to be clear, I think you could see Will and I looking at this, going like, okay, it's a kid. He's going fast. Now, if you want to take the serious angle. You look at a story, there's just a story in the NFL this past year, Henry Ruggs, promising career ahead of him, Alabama receiver, the Oakland Raiders. Now, I think there was more involved in that in terms of.
There's a few differences. Drinking. Ruggs was going 158 drunk.
Yes. I understand the difference. Okay. Not trying to say it's the exact same thing. I'm just saying it's an element that of reckless decision-making that you got to be careful with. And Anthony Richardson, if you have a good season here, my man, you could have how many millions of dollars next year? Like you got to protect yourself. You got to protect your investment here. Like even if you just got in a car crash going 95 those roads aren't huge either. Like if you're going 95, you spun off the roads, the wet roads, I don't know anything. Like you said, deer comes over, you have to swerve or something. Or even if you hit a deer going that fast, like I actually had a deer hit me one time. Jump into my window. Thank God my window was closed. I drive with the window open a lot, but jumped into my side door. It was like a linebacker knocking a running back in. Like my whole door was caved in. So when you're cooking like down those roads and a deer hits you, you could get pretty good there. But what I want
so hold on. Let me say one thing here. So Richardson got pulled over. So he's going to face the consequences from the state. People know about it, and he has parents. And in my mind, the parents and the consequences from whatever legal authority is involved is plenty. And yeah, he probably did a few extra wind sprints and stuff like that for football. But, look, at the end of the day, there will be consequences for the actions. You accept the consequences he has.
Even to get up in front of the group and have to say that's not fun to do. That's not fun to do. So, I mean, look, I think the kid, he did the interview with Della Torre. It sounds like the kid, it's just, again, college kid did a stupid thing, whatever. Like it's not a huge deal. Now, let's go to the backlash. Let's go to the backlash on Twitter. There was a segment of our fan base that just doesn't like anything to be reported on that, anything that remotely has a negative light on the school to be reported. And there's this instinct to say that if it's remotely negative, well, what about all the positive stuff that he did too? Which, okay, I understand. I understand that to a degree. I understand that, hey, if you're going to crush the kid for getting a speeding ticket, it's okay that you acknowledge that he does good things. And I think there are those stories out there. Some people don't want all their volunteer activities displayed all the time. So it's not like media's following you around for all that stuff anyway. And it's like you and I said, I don't think this reflects on Anthony Richardson's character at all. It's a kid who made a mistake. So I don't think it's necessary to bring up all the good things that he does just because I think you probably think everything you hear, he seems like a decent kid. He seems like a good kid. Huh? We're rooting for him. He's QB1, man. Let's go. Let's go. We're fully behind Anthony Richardson. But like to say it's not a noteworthy event that the starting quarterback for the Gators is that really a lot of things that the starting quarterback for the Gators does is noteworthy. I read Matt Baker's article. It was literally just reciting the facts. It was just like he was driving 105. It was at 411. It was at this road. It was at this time. End of article. It was like a 200-word article. And for people to be crushing the story that hard and say it's not newsworthy, help me understand that, Will, because I can't wrap my head around that at all.
So you're also talking about the guy who wrote an article leaving Kyle Trask off his Heisman ballot, right?
I do know there is some beef with Matt.
So you got to. I mean, okay. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying that Baker has done some things or written some things that have been antagonistic toward the Florida program. The guy is a Tampa Bay Times writer, though. He's not a Florida fan, nor does he need to be a Florida fan. And I think this is so. I think people need to decide what they want and then make criticisms based on that. So there are two things here. One is it is absolutely newsworthy when the star quarterback gets pulled over for jaywalking, let alone getting pulled over for doing 105 and having a court summons, right? It's a story. You may not like that it's a story. You may not like that your quarterback got caught. You may not like it is a story. I don't think it's a story that condemns him, but I think it's a story and it's legitimately a story. So there are two things I think that you can take umbrage with when it comes to Baker's story. The first, and I think this is the thing that people got upset about, and I don't know enough about the details to comment on it, is the timing. The fact that it came out the day after the spring game and essentially sort of dampened all the enthusiasm. It's almost like when people get mad at somebody for like breaking news of a commitment before a kid commits, and then the guy gets piled on for doing stuff like that as well. It's like, did you need to drag the kid down when he was high? When he was as high as he could be, right? And that I understand. At the same time, I can't imagine a reporter holding on to a story for that kind of timing because someone will beat you then. And in reporting, like the whole point is to have the story first, right? So you get the story, you get news of the story, you investigate it, you confirm it, you maybe even reach out for some comments, and then you write it. So I think the timing is probably coincidental, but I think people probably took umbrage with that a little bit. The thing I think that I actually took a little bit of umbrage with is that he talked about factually what happened with Richardson, and then took Billy Napier's quote about leadership and a quarterback being your leader and being exemplary of the program and all sorts of that, and stuck that right beneath it. And there's an inference, and that inference then is it open for interpretation, right? If you don't like Matt Baker, if you think he has it out for the Florida program, then you go, oh, you're inferring that Richardson is an inferior leader because of this. And if you don't have any of that history with Baker, then you probably just brush it off and say, hey, this is fine. It's not that big a deal. I think the people who had a history with Baker reached out and told him they weren't happy with it. I don't think he did anything wrong, right? I think when you look at it from a journalistic perspective, I don't think he did anything wrong. And I think you got to be really careful, because I'm sure there were a lot of people who were upset, like after the Jim McElwain era, and a bunch of stuff started leaking out about how he didn't get along with different people in the program, and how things were toxic within the program, and all sorts of, how he didn't have any of the resources he needed, how nobody liked him, and all this sort of stuff. And everybody's going, why didn't we know this while it was going on? And the reason you didn't know it while it's going on is two reasons. One, access. The access goes away for these guys who have access if they're too critical. And then the other part of it is that you end up having to deal with this blowback, right? So those are the two things. So I think from the standpoint of Baker, I kind of sit there and go, I think he's getting kind of a bad rap on this one, other than maybe the thing that he had at the bottom with Napier. I don't think it was necessary to put that in there. And I think it drew an inference that probably ticked some people off. The thing that really got me was the stuff that came afterwards, where it talked about, well, he really better grow as a leader, and he's not an appropriate leader, and if you so there were some tweets out there with people defending Baker who were talking about Henry Ruggs, and Ruggs is just a completely different situation.
It is a different story.
Someone died because he got drunk, allegedly, and was going 150 miles an hour. That is very different than getting pulled over on an empty road, going 50 miles an hour slower without any sort of alcohol in your system. Now, you can say both are irresponsible, but the levels of irresponsibility are so significantly outside of the, again, I think you can say it's a newsworthy story without trying to compare the two, because that's literally trying to compare someone who goes to the shooting range and, fires off a few rounds in the wrong direction versus somebody who shoots somebody. The comparison just is not valid.
I see between those two is that a lot can change in an instant. And I'm not saying that they're anywhere close to, in terms of Henry Ruggs had about 3 more layers of bad decisions attached to what he did. Okay. I'm not saying it's the remotely, the thing that is the same is that you're doing something where you could change a lot like that. And that's the thing that's the only thing where I think people could make that comparison to have a point.
But here's why I went into confession mode about the things I did when I was young.
Right.
Is because it's really easy to be 40 years old with 4 kids and look back with all my experiences and recognize exactly what you just said. And I think Henry Ruggs 20 years from now will be in a position that he doesn't believe that he was that stupid, right? And Henry Ruggs may have even been that the day afterwards, that he didn't believe that he was that stupid. But the problem is that for a lot of us, and not everybody, but for a lot of us, experience is required in order to learn those lessons. And sometimes those lessons are inexpensive, and sometimes they're incredibly expensive. And in the case of Henry Ruggs, one, there are 3 other layers on there, like you said, but that's a really expensive lesson he's learning that he's going to end up spending a lot of time in jail because he learned that lesson and really pushed those boundaries. Anthony Richardson hopefully learns an inexpensive lesson here, but I don't think it says anything about his character. I don't think it says anything about his leadership. I think it says he's a 19-year-old kid who did something stupid. And the idea that I'm going to look, so there's a professor, I can't remember where, who I think maybe George Washington, who every year when his class comes in, he's a political science professor. Every year when his class comes in, he asks them, would you have been an abolitionist back in the times of the Civil War? And every single person raises their hand. And then he starts talking about the things you'd have to give up in order to be an abolitionist. Your family would disown you. They might even try to kill you. Your whole village would send you out. All of the different things that you would be forced to give up in order to do that. And the point is that looking at it in 2022, the clear, morally right thing to do is to be an abolitionist. I'm not debating that at all. But back in those times, it was much more difficult to do that because of the other things that were in the way. So the experiences that we have now, looking back, changed the way the interpretation looks. I think it's the same thing here, different situation, obviously, but I think it's similar in that the experiences I have as a 40-year-old make me look back at what someone who's 19 is doing and go, yeah, that's stupid. But I did it when I was 19 or 20. So to sit there and clutch pearls about it and say he needs to become a better leader, and all, how he'll become a better leader? Because he makes mistakes.
I was going to say, this will make him a better leader.
Well,
admitting your mistake and saying, you know what, I did something that I shouldn't have done, and I'm going to work to do better. I think that's a part of growing as a leader and growing as a young man in college too.
But the pearl clutching from people who are 40 or 50 who have made similar mistakes in the much more recent history and much more, near-term history than when they were 20, I think is again where people got a little bit up in arms about, the idea that, look, we've all made these sorts of mistakes, to then essentially say, okay, it's newsworthy, we're going to report it, to leap from there to, hey, now we're going to start questioning the guy's leadership, I think is a place where things really start to get taken a little bit too far. And again, I just go back to the idea of, one of the things that I think makes Anthony Richardson special is he's willing to take risks. One of the things that happens when you're willing to take risks is that probably doesn't just stay on the field. And you have to learn sort of where those guardrails are and where those boundaries are. And the way you learn them is by pushing the edge, and then society and other things pull you back. I think when you have a society that doesn't pull you back, that's a problem. At the same time, I think when you're never willing to push a boundary, you don't grow and improve and get any better. And so
football Freud over here explaining off-field behavior based on on-field analysis.
Hey, look, and the other thing,
it's the only type of, that's the type of analysis you'll get on Stand Up and Holler.
But look, I mean, Anthony Richardson is guilty of dancing and injuring his knee, and he's guilty of speeding. And out of all the things that have happened, I mean, Florida has 2 people who have been convicted of murder on its rosters previously. So if we're going to start having leadership discussions about things we need to do, and those guys were both on national championship teams. So if we're going to start having discussions about leadership and what that means, I think there are other places to start than Anthony Richardson. Now, if he gets pulled over in 3 weeks and there's an AK-47 in the back of his car and the whole thing smells like weed, now we have a very different discussion, right? But that's, again, those are layers, right? And I'm not, none of that happened. So the pearl clutching to me just seems completely unjustified. Again, I think the initial reporting of the story is fine. I think the follow-up and sort of the holier than thou stuff for all the people who recognize, or at least are able to look through their glasses and say, yeah, I'm glad people weren't looking at me under that microscope when I was 19 or 20 years old. They would have seen me behind that dumpster drunk one night, or they would have seen me doing something stupid, across campus, or that, heck, a lot of us have stories with tailgates more recently than when we were 20 that we probably hope that don't get out there. So that to me is the thing, is that there's a lot of judging as opposed to a lot of hoping that the lessons and the guardrails that are put in place sort of curtail the risk taking in places other than the field, but allow it to continue on the field.
Gainesville Dodge, real winner in all this, man. I had no idea he had an idea with Gainesville Dodge. I have read the phrase Gainesville Dodge about 100 times in the last week. So,
well, you've said it enough that they need to come on here and be our sponsor.
Yeah, I think he's maybe doing a little, maybe it's a little advertisement. Maybe it's a setup. Who knows? Let's get into the conspiracy side of this. Little setup for Gainesville Dodge. Get a friendly police officer, strip a road, clear it off. I don't know. Who knows?
If you're going to do that, then it needs to be his girlfriend who got pulled over for going 105. He was just the passenger. If you're going to do conspiracies, you got to do it right.
Setup. At least do a proper setup. But anyway, if you want to drive fast like Anthony Richardson, Gainesville Dodge, check it out. NIL, really living up to that NIL deal. I like that. So if any other NIL companies, you got to hit up Anthony here. He's going to get you some good promo here. All right. Anyway, it's April. We just talked about it. We just talked about a speeding ticket story for 25 minutes there, Will. I can't, 1 week closer to football, right? 1 week closer to football. That's all we could say about this time of year.
Look, I mean, there's never a dull moment, Gator Nation. There's always something going on.
Trademark Gator Dave.
As Dave says, yes. I figure since I'm a co-host, I'm allowed to use it without giving it.
I have the legal obligation to say that. So.
But look, I mean, it's a story, right? And I think it's a story for reasons beyond just Anthony Richardson. I think it's a story because of, like you said, the response to the media. And I get it. You want to hear positive things about your team. You want to hear positive things about your program, but I think you want realistic things about your team or I hope you want realistic things about your team and realistic things about your program. And we've been
the phrase, don't shoot the messenger exists, Will.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. This has actually been a really conscious effort on our part. Read and reaction is separate from the program, and that's intentional. And the reason is that we want to be able to give real analysis and not feel like we're beholden to any sort of access. So, press passes and things like that, those are things that we have not pursued. And the reason we haven't pursued them is because we want to be able to maintain our objectivity. Because the minute you start getting into that, where someone can take away your press passes, or you get to a point where you're not going to get access to a coach or to a player or to a staff member, well, now all of a sudden you got to watch what you say. And I specifically don't want to be in that situation where I've got to do that. There are, it's clear that there are reporters who are favorites and reporters who are not. If you want to know who the favorites are, just look at who Scott Strickland talked to after the Neubauer story came out. That'll sort of tell you who the favorites are. And so that should tell you who's going to color the stories favorably towards Florida. And, again, it's sort of, you wake up, you read CNN, you read Fox News, and whatever's the same is probably the real news. And then everything else is just open to interpretation. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to the different media sources. And look, I don't think those people do bad jobs. I just think that they have constraints based on the access that's required. And we specifically have tried to avoid that because not having access, I think, gives us a different perspective. Not better, not worse, just different. And that's a big part of trying to figure out who you are in the space and how you're going to report on things.
Yeah. And you know what? It's not everybody in the media's job to be a fan either. So it's not, and if they choose to push buttons a little bit, I did see that quote at the end of the Baker story. Like I kind of just took it with a grain of salt on that, because I know where it's coming from too. But like, I think at the same time, like, to get super upset about it, I don't know. I think that this is a kid who, it's a simple story. It's April. I mean, honestly, like it's not like the guy's getting suspended for the Utah game over this. So we could, it's going to be something that is a passing thought. 3 months from now, we're barely going to remember it. So at the end of the day, just something people got worked up on Twitter over the weekend, and just something worth addressing.
I got 4 kids, man. I don't have time to get worked up about anything on Twitter. Like the minute somebody sends me something that's insulting and doesn't have any sort of factual basis, I'm just like, that's it. I'm done arguing with you. I don't have time.
Hey, Twitter, Will Miles says you can't work him up. Let's see.
I'm sure. Well, hell, we asked him for mean tweets when I sang a couple of weeks ago, and all it was, Will, that's not bad. You ought to sing some more. I'm like, you people are the nicest people ever. Who knew? I mean, Gator Twitter can be malicious sometimes when people cross them. I was expecting way worse than that. So,
all right. I didn't intend for this to be a thing where you pat yourself on the back again about that. So we'll cut that short. All right, everybody.
Come on, man. You got, like you said, it's April. We gotta brag about stuff.
Thank you, everybody, for joining the show again tonight. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. We'll see you next week on Stand Up and Holler. Have a great week, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.